Hey Fuzzbutts, I'm Silverpaw, and today I'm bringing you Chapter 8 of The Storm Within. Now before we begin, I just wanted to ask you guys that if you like the video, please leave a like. They all really help me out. Anyways, let's get started.
This is Peppy. All systems go.
What have you done? Filled with guilt, Fox paced down the narrow hall towards his living quarters. The metal flooring was cold and unwelcoming against his bare feet. What were you thinking? The door slid open in front of him, his pajamas billowing in the wake of the swift movement. How could you be so foolish? He entered the untidy bedroom, kicking some dirty laundry out of his way as he walked in. Among the laundry lay the medical gown from the night before, and his bloodied pilot's uniform, crumpled and tattered in the corner. What the hell is wrong with you, Fox? He took a look at himself in the mirror, for the first time since the incident, and nearly gasped at his reflection. His usually golden brown fur had lost its luster, matted in some places and crusted with blood in others. Cuts were visible across his face, and his eyes were sunken and bloodshot. In other words, he was a disaster, both inside and out. He tore his gaze from the mirror and planted himself on the edge of his bed, holding his head in his hands. It shocked him to think that he was capable of being so rude towards Wolf this entire time, without even realizing it. Making jokes about his downed ship, the one that you downed, no less, and the comment about the hospital, and the food processor. He ran it all over in his head, every quip, every comeback, every unnecessary remark, and cringed in shame. That wasn't the Fox everybody knew and loved, and it certainly wasn't the Fox he wanted anybody to see. The events of the last few days had clearly worn him thin, and he needed to take some time to unwind and recover. He flopped back onto his back, hands still grasping his head in shame. He tried desperately to calm himself, but he couldn't relax, not now with so much on his mind. He'd go crazy if he continued to lie idly on the bed. He needed something to distract him from his thoughts. Pulling himself back to his feet, Fox dragged himself towards the medical gown lying on the floor. He bent low and picked it up, careful not to aggravate his back. How do I even wash this? He pondered out loud, the plastic robe squeaking and crinkling in his hands. He shrugged and tossed it into the laundry basket, deciding he could worry about it later. Next on the list was the pilot's uniform, crumpled in the corner like a wounded animal. It was hard to find a place on the outfit to grab a hold of that wasn't covered in blood, but eventually the Vulpine found an unsoiled patch in the middle of the chest. Pinching it and holding it at arm's length, he dropped the pitiful garment into the basket on top of the gown, eager to let it go. The movement reminded Fox of some sort of claw machine game, like the kind he would see at the Cornerian Festival as a child. The annual celebration in his home city was one of Fox's fondest and most vivid childhood memories. It was the only time of the year when his father would take a break from his mercenary work, and the two would spend quality time together. Strolling through the fairgrounds, grasping cotton candy in one hand, holding his father's in the other. No, he didn't need any extra emotional turmoil, not now. Eager to occupy his mind with anything else, Fox searched for more chores to do in his room. It was only then that he realized how untidy it had become. More laundry was still strewn across the floor, his trash can was overflowing, and every upright surface was littered with dirty dishes. Another pang of shame hit the Vulpine. Ever since his days in the academy, he had always prided himself on how neat and orderly he'd been. As it stood now, though, as it had been for quite a while, his room was a much different story. In that moment, in the center of his pitiful bedroom, he realized just how far he truly had fallen. He collapsed onto the ledge of his bed and held his head in his hands, overcome with a wave of shame and all too familiar grief. The Vulpine had tried to deny it for months now, but the simple truth of the matter was that something was very wrong with him, and he couldn't figure out what it was. He'd been able to mask his ill emotions until now, but, judging by his actions lately, the events of the last few days had caused his cracked facade to finally shatter. Another pang of regret found its way to Fox's gut when he realized just how much of his burden he had unloaded upon Wolf and Crystal. They didn't deserve any of the treatment he'd given. They didn't deserve to get dragged along in the debris of his personal storm. There was no way the Vulpine would be able to set things right, without first offering each of them the most sincere apologies he possibly could. But how? He couldn't face them that same day. There was no doubt still seething anger from his actions, though justifiably so. "I want to avoid as much of their wrath as possible," he muttered absent-mindedly. Immediately, he cursed himself for his selfishness. "Shut your damn mouth, Fox. You're going to apologize before dinner time, and that's that." No matter how disappointed Crystal was, no matter what cutting quips Wolf threw at him, he was going to apologize to them both. Only then he could begin to clear his conscience of what he'd done, one small speck at a time. "You deserve all the wrath in the world for how terrible you've been acting towards both of them anyways." He stood from the bed and continued to clean his bedroom. He couldn't march into the medbay or Crystal's room just yet. He needed time to think up the best way to apologize, and he decided he might as well finish up the chores he'd started in the meantime. He picked up some dirty laundry from the floor, thinking it his way through the apologies as he eyed the crumpled clothing. "Gotta make sure I address everything I've done wrong." He dropped it into the basket and moved towards a shirt near the door. "I can't just show up and say sorry." He grabbed the shirt and tossed it into the basket, along with some socks he'd picked up along the way. "They have to know I truly mean it." As a psychic, Crystal would know right off the bat, but Wolf, he'd be harder to convince. Years of animosity between the two couldn't be erased by a mere "my bad." He moved towards a pair of underpants hiding beneath the foot of the bed, the last piece of clothing on the floor, and dropped it into the laundry basket. He was already beginning to feel better, though there was still much work to be done. At least he'd started the process of making things right again. He sat down on the edge of the bed, admiring the now clean floor of his room as he continued to think about his plans for the rest of the day. He'd take a shower, make himself presentable, talk to Crystal, then confront Wolf. The mere thought of the lupine was enough to fill Fox with shame. The sooner he could get the apology over with, the sooner he could help alleviate the tension he created between the two. The vulpine stood up again. "Let's get this over with," he told himself resolutely. He grabbed the last of the clean clothes remaining in his closet, left his room, and headed towards the communal showers. As Fox made his way down the hall, he was too preoccupied to notice another door opening behind him with a soft shroom. He entered a stall in the shower room and turned the faucet on, wincing in anticipation as he pulled his shirt off his back. He'd been expecting sharp pain as it aggravated his stitches, but was pleasantly surprised to feel nothing more than a slight tugging as the medical technology continued to do its job. After removing the rest of his clothes, he stepped carefully into the shower, inhaling sharply as the slightly too cold water ambushed his back. After a moment, however, it warmed itself and Fox exhaled in relief. He could feel his sore muscles begin to relax under the heat of the water pouring over him. He could feel his tired mind begin to clear as the mental blockade of stress and anxiety boiled away into the stream around him. He lathered some soap into his fur and wiped himself down, ridding himself of the crusted blood and sweat that had plagued his pelt for the last several days. As he continued to scrub himself clean, he began to plan what he would say to Crystal. "Hey Crystal, I know you're probably still... Well, I know you're still mad at me, but I just wanted to apologize for... What exactly had he done wrong to Crystal? Now that he thought about it, he hadn't really done anything worth apologizing for. If anything, she should be apologizing to... Stop it! He cursed under his breath. He'd played the victim for far too long and couldn't let himself fall into that state again. His team was well aware by now that he had been battered and bruised, both figuratively and literally, so he needed to move on from that default fallback position. For bringing you into my mess with Wolf, that's what I'm apologizing for. The Vulpine had shot down every attempt of hers to reconcile the two. Crystal had given him clear instructions on how to make things better with Wolf, but Fox was too stubborn, too arrogant to take her advice. As a psychic, there was no doubt that she knew how best to resolve the situation, and yet Fox had blatantly disregarded her advice over and over again. He began to rinse himself off one last time, still thinking his way through the apology. I promise I won't let my arrogance overpower your judgment again. The Vulpine turned the water off. I'm sorry, Crystal. With a clear mind and body, the Vulpine toweled himself dry and slipped into the tank top and sweats he'd brought with him. He hadn't realized how pitifully disgusting he'd been until he smelled the refreshing scent of his new clothes and felt the crispness of the air against his newly softened fur. With a contented sigh, he gathered his old clothes and left the showers. He walked down the hallway, feet pattering against the metal, and approached his bedroom. Fox? He jumped in alarm at the voice behind him and spun around. Crystal leaned against the wall next to the doorway of the shower room, not a hint of emotion on her face. Crystal, the Vulpine stammered. I must not have seen you there. I could tell you were lost in your thoughts. She eyed him, still adorning his expression of stoicism. Fox sighed, looking towards the floor. Yeah, you could say that. The stronger someone's emotions were, the easier it was for Crystal to pick up on them. No doubt she could read him like a book, which meant... His eyes shot back up to her in alarm. Did you catch any of what I... Yeah? Well, how much? All of it.